The international standoff over Iran's nuclear program is fueling rising concerns that diplomacy may soon give way to military action. Israel says the world can't afford to wait much longer, while President Obama is fending off political opponents who favour a military strike. But despite some of the hawkish tone, some believe a new Cold War with a focus on deterrence is a far better option than another Middle East conflict. North America correspondent Michael Brissenden reports.
We are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. We believe there is still time and space to pursue a diplomatic solution.
There's been plenty of talk recently about the cost of stopping Iran. I think it's time we started talking about the cost of not stopping Iran.
Reports last month that Iran was moving more rapidly than first thought to producing weapons-grade fuel has led some to believe a strike against the Iranian regime is now almost inevitable. But others say the factors driving the hawkish rhetoric have as much to do with the politics in Washington as anything else.
The biggest difference this year is the U.S. electoral calendar and the fact that we've got an incumbent president who is fighting for re-election. And on the outside, you have the Israeli government of Netanyahu, very experienced in playing American politics.
And the message from the Israeli leader is clear. His country, he says, is growing impatient. Israel is ready to strike, and the window for diplomacy has almost closed.
We've waited for diplomacy to work. We've waited for sanctions to work. None of us can afford to wait much longer.
Israel is always a factor in US Middle East policy, even more so in an election year. But now the stakes are higher than usual, and the chest thumping is, if anything, more enthusiastic than ever.
The red line is now, because the Iranians now are deepening their fortifications, deepening their underground laboratories, deepening their commitment to nuclear weapons while we talk.
If they do not tear down those facilities, we will tear down them ourselves.
This is the most powerful Jewish lobby group in the United States, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. At its recent policy conference held in Washington, Republican presidential candidates lined up one after the other to push a hard line and denounce the strength of the current president's convictions.
I've seen a president who has been reticent. He says he has Israel's back. From everything I've seen from the conduct of this administration, he has turned his back on the people of Israel.
Yet the current administration has promoted a policy of engagement with Iran. Hope is not a foreign policy. The only thing respected by thugs and tyrants is our resolve, backed by our power and our readiness to use it.
In this country, the depth of a presidential candidate's support for Israel is often seen as a guide to their overall policy strength. But some have interpreted support for Israel as support for AIPAC, even if, strangely enough, sometimes the policy positions are at odds with the vast majority of American Jewish voters.
The friendship of the U.S. president has never been more important. What has President Obama's record on Israel really been?
The hawkish pro-Israel groups have so far been dominating the public debate, and some have made no secret of their disdain for the position taken by the president.
He traveled to Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, but each time skipped Israel.
Now what I'd like to do is take some questions. I want to make sure that we end before the call to prayers.
But on Iran, as on many other facets of Middle East policy, Jewish American views are diverse.
I really think that the groups toward the right end of the Jewish American community, at least their political institutions here in Washington, have overreached on this issue and seriously misjudge both the comfort of the Jewish American community that they claim to represent, as well as the comfort of politicians here in Washington with ratcheting up the war talk.
Dylan Williams is the director of a relatively new Jewish lobby group that calls itself J Street. J Street claims to be more representative of the more liberal views of the majority of Jewish Americans. And he believes most Jewish voters would fall in line with polls that show 3 out of 4 Americans are opposed to a strike by the US or Israel against Iran.
The only way to resolve a nuclear program permanently is by getting the country that's running it to stop it or dismantle it itself. A military strike, even if it were to be effective in delaying a program, would only be a temporary and not a permanent fix, and in fact could lead to an acceleration of the program.
And for the moment, that's also the view coming from those close to the US intelligence community. At the end of his 28-year-long career, Paul Pillar was the CIA's National Intelligence Officer for the Near East and South Asia.
I don't think a strike is inevitable. I certainly hope it isn't. There is, however, especially just over the past year or so, enough of the sense that the chance of such a strike has gone up, either at the hands of the Israelis or the Americans, that it has come to be discussed as if it were acceptable, which, in my view, I don't think it is. We have to remind
In fact, Paul Pillar reaches back through nuclear history to support his view that eventually America and Israel may even have to accept and adapt to a nuclear Iran.
We faced this thing in the past. We faced it with Stalin's Soviet Union, Mao's China. We faced it with the first, what was described at the time as the first Islamic bomb with Pakistan.
Allahu Akbar.
In the end, another Cold War may be the only politically palatable course. Despite the ramped-up rhetoric from some, after 2 hot wars and nearly a decade of conflict in the Middle East, there's very little appetite in America at the moment for another one.